Hey guys, this is Elias Tufexis. I play Locke, and you are watching Trick Culture.
I said it in the press tour that the Star Trek that people want is 1,000 more episodes of TNG, and we ain't giving them that. The expectations that people had then of also saying, like I've seen a lot of people online saying, this is the first movie we've had since Star Trek Beyond. And
Hmm.
then they go, and it's not even a shadow of that. Well, it's not going to be like that. First off, that was a $200 million movie that had an unlimited runtime, could have been as long as they wanted, whilst we had essentially two episodes of a Strange New Worlds budget to make an entire movie starring Michelle Yeoh, and it had to be limited to 95 minutes and 59 seconds, not a second longer. It's an unfair comparison. I mean, the most accurate thing I saw was that it feels like a pilot. And for me, and I said this to you yesterday, I think it should really just stand in there with the feature-length episodes of Star Trek that have ever been made. And if we make 10 more of these, I think this will find its right place. I knew that people would have a extreme reaction to it when it came out. Am I disappointed at the cruelty? Yes, because we're meant to be better than that in the Star Trek fandom. We're not Star Wars. We're not any of the other fandoms out there. We're meant to be kinder. Not meant to be going online trying to hurt people's feelings. Like that's the whole point. I'm a firm believer that if you love Star Trek, you must be a good person, and if you're a good person, you don't do things like that. So is it disappointing to see some of that reaction? Of course it is. Is it surprising? No. But the thing that I was trying to get ahead of, and I said it over and over and over again throughout the press tour, is my favorite line, which I've said many times. Star Trek isn't for you, it's for everyone. And that means that if you don't like this Star Trek, that's fine. Don't like it. Don't ruin it for everybody else. If you didn't like DS9, don't destroy DS9 for the people that do. If you love TNG, love your thing. I'm seeing a lot of really positive reactions from people that don't really know Star Trek that well. And those are the people that we were trying to hit. I knew that the Star Trek faithful would be upset that there's, you know, not really much about Section 31, the government agency in it. I get that. We'll do that in the sequel. There are so many things that have been misunderstood, and that's largely our fault due to time constraints. We weren't able to get it in. Like, there's only one member of actual Section 31 in our team, and that's Alok. The rest of us are just people that he has found. We're not official members of Section 31 at all. And when you think about the Sloans of it all and the history of Section 31, Alok fits right in with what that is. The rest of us do not. So he's the actual only member of Section 31, and he's tasked with putting together a team, and he chooses his team. None of us are members. So if there's a sequel and we do more of these, you're going to see a lot more of like the real Section 31, like the real nasty stuff and how they've applied themselves to the history of the Federation. There are so many things that wanted to get across that we kind of didn't manage to do. So the upset, I get it. But I would encourage every single person to view it not with lower expectations, but with new expectations. Like this is, if we do 10 of these or it turns into a series, this will be considered a great feature-length episode in a series that we end up doing, rather than a movie that doesn't live up to the other movies.
I mean, first of all, thank you for dealing with this head on because, we, for example, and you know this. So we spoke very briefly last week. I was part of the press junket. I mean, actually, out of interest, I mean, I know I got 5 minutes and I got yourself in bed. How many interviews did you have that day?
Somewhere in the region of 80,
Yeah.
probably over the course of that, including podcasts and TV interviews. When I woke up the next day, I didn't have a word in me. I couldn't speak. It was
Yeah,
really bad. Me and Amari had both lost our voices, and we had a whole other day of press to do.
I am not shocked at all by that because and this is just kind of a peek behind the curtain thing. So we joined the call and from the beginning you have someone going, right, you've got 5 minutes, you've got four
I know.
minutes, which is fair enough. That's you've got to be strict like that. And the reason I bring that up is not just because of obviously the time constraint, but one of the little bits of feedback, for example, that we got was that in the maybe 4 minutes we got with Alex Kurtzman, that I didn't personally tell him what a terrible human being he was, and that I didn't, and that I didn't call for his head and make sure that he knew. And I thought, right, if I don't speak in hyperbole for a second, it's that it is this sort of this rage, as you say, and it is from the minority. It is really from the minority. And I'm not to say that there aren't strong feelings out there. I'm not brushing that off aside. But I mean, the ones, the hate. The hate is the minority. It's just loud.
It's not even from people that really hate it. They just want to be cruel. But I will say this in defense of Kurtzman, right? First off, I love him. He's great. What I didn't know, when I got this job, I was like, oh, Section 31 movie. I don't want to. Why are they doing a Section 31 movie? It's going to be hated from the get-go. No one's going to want to watch a Section 31 movie. We're doing a TV budget movie. This isn't going to be what people want. Blah, blah, blah. And then I spoke to Alex and I spoke to Tunde, and they explained to me that Star Trek is dying. And I don't know if people know that, but if I was talking about Star Trek at my gym, where I fight, I'm a boxer and I fight with a lot of, kids. I don't fight them, but train with. None of them knew what Star Trek was. Can you imagine that? I mean, just conceive of that for a second, that I would say Star Trek, and they were like, Star Wars? I went, no, Star Trek. And they were like, I think I've heard of it. Now, that was pretty upsetting for me. Star Trek's fan base has never been enormous. It's always been small and incredibly passionate group. It's never compared to the Harry Potter fan groups or the Star Wars fan groups. It's never had hundreds of millions of fans around the world. It's always been a dedicated group, and that dedicated group is aging. And we are going to lose Star Trek if we don't bring in new fans, new eyes, and new ways of getting people to love the things that we love. Even if you try and get someone to watch TNG, the first 2 seasons, the production values were so much lower than from the 3rd season onwards. It's really dated in lots of ways. Even like trying to get kids to watch the original series, it's just not going to happen. So how do we enlarge the fandom? How do we get people to come and be part of this? How do we keep Star Trek alive? And they explained to me very, very clearly, and once I'd heard this, I was 100% behind this movie, was you have to make different flavors of Star Trek for a different time. You have to try and bring in new people, as that's what Starfleet Academy is going to be about. That's what Section 31's about. This film, and I'm sorry to say it wasn't made for people that love Star Trek. It was made to make people want to learn more about Star Trek. That was the idea. It was for it to bring in new eyes, new people, and then introduce them to that world. And because of that, it was never going to be the canon-loving, historical, exposition-laden, character-based kind of thing that was homaging the history of the Star Trek franchise. It was always going to be lots of action, lots of glamour, lots of loud music, lots of things just to get people to come in and be like, okay, what's a Klingon? And then we go, look at Discovery, then look at TNG, look at this. And once I understood that, like how dire and how hard, I mean, even the 2009 movies, they barely broke even, and they were massive, starring everybody.
You said something that I wanted to bring in, because I believe it was in an interview with Darren Scott for SFX magazine, about this backstory that you had sort of in your head come up with for Zeph. Mm-hmm. And if you wouldn't mind talking about, so it's kind of why he's in the suit.
Yeah, it wasn't just me. It was Craig Sweeney, the writer, as well. Okay,
I actually didn't know that. I thought, that's it.
It was something we sat down with. I was like, look, I've got this idea, and then he fleshed it out, and then we went back and forth on it, and we're like, oh, maybe it could be this, and then we talked about. Well, I'll start from the beginning. But basically, the idea was that Zeph was paraplegic. We weren't sure whether we were going to go paraplegic or quadriplegic, but we went paraplegic. Decided that what he had done, that the suit was his wheelchair, essentially, because in the Federation that we know, you would assume that any birth defects had been they're treated. That there's never been any conversation about ableism on Trek. Because none of those things have ever really had to have been addressed, other than maybe when Worf broke his neck.
There was that one. I'm just thinking as well, just the Masterpiece Society. I remember when they go and Geordi is effectively told you wouldn't have been allowed to be born.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I suppose Geordi is a conversation about ableism. I guess I skipped that one. I suppose that is very true. Yeah. But I guess physical ableism.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So it was a chance to kind of address that in a time before that. And Craig contributed. He was like, what if he did it to himself? And that's when we got really excited about it. So the idea was that, Zeph was a very insecure person, an engineer doing body augments, body modding kind of thing, and then implanted something into his own spine, which disabled him to that degree. And that's when Alok found him, and using illegal Section 31 technology helped him build this suit. And therefore the suit, which gave him all the super strength and super speed and mobility and all of these different things, was actually a crutch. And that if we do more, would give us a ability to have a conversation where we talk about without the suit, where we get to show how important a wheelchair is for somebody in terms of not being othered and feeling like they have their own sense of independence. And that, that was the whole idea behind Zeph and what he had done to himself and where we might be able to go with it. The conversation inevitably turned to, should you have an able-bodied person playing a disabled person? I was like, well, we discussed it at length. It was like, yeah, but he still needs to be able to run and do all those other things when he's in the suit. So it was like it's a sensitive thing that we're not entirely sure if we would even ever go into. But I think it would be a really good thing to kind of, have that conversation about ableism in the Federation, to talk about how things might affect somebody. How does a holodeck change when you got somebody that's in a wheelchair or doesn't have the ability of their legs? Like, can a person who doesn't even have legs or serve on a bridge? Like, we haven't seen that level of representation. We're in a really, I think, good place in Star Trek in terms of visibility for sexual identity, gender identity, ethnicities. All of these things are really, I feel like race is very well represented in Star Trek, but disabled people are not. And I just felt that Zeph would be an opportunity maybe to do that, with him being such an obvious, and with me being such an obvious meathead, and Zeph being so obviously physically capable, to kind of invert that and say, actually, he's only physically capable because of his wheelchair.
Might even be that it's like we're right at the end of DS9 and Odo's been cured at this point, right? Mm-hmm. And he turns around and says, our Starfleet giving the cure to the... I guess spoilers for a 30-year-old TV show. Our Starfleet giving the cure to the founders, and Sisko says no. And Odo says something that I think played directly in... Possibly, I'd love to speak to Craig about this as well, whether this played into the theme of this film. It's like, it's funny, isn't it? Starfleet claims to abhor Section 31's tactics, but when they need their dirty work done, they look the other way. Tidy arrangement, isn't it? And that's 30 years ago.
That's what DS9 was about. I mean, there wasn't a pure character on that show. I mean, Bashir was a liar and a cheat, and he was an augment, and he was using his he was not a good person. Worf was a xenophobe, an extreme xenophobe. Colin Meaney was Chief was a war criminal. Garrick was a traitor, double agent. Who knows what Garrick was, but he was a lot of things. Quark was completely scrupulous. Sisko, like you said, your friend was keeping track of the amount of war crimes Sisko commits.
True. Yeah.
Kira, I mean, lunatic for a start. There are no good characters. There are no pure people on DS9 like the other shows. They are all great characters, and that's why Section 31 suddenly became, kind of important in DS9. And I've said all this long because they appear in Enterprise. Section 31 makes their first appearance in Enterprise, and kind of that's where we assume that they first kind of were formed, but they weren't really. If whatever they were beforehand, their version of the CIA, NSA, whatever. But
yeah.
They've existed forever. All of the things that you would know about the Treaty of Algeron, all of the things throughout history, every single conflict would have the fingerprints of Section 31 on it. You just would never know about it. You would never read about it. It would be stricken from the record. And that allows the people in the Federation to live like saints in paradise. You know, that's what I think would be really interesting to do, to go back and view historical moments of Star Trek through the lens of how Section 31 had something to do with it. I think that would be fascinating, to go back in history and see how that happens, and see how what moments we can mess with. To sum up, and if I were to leave you with any kind of permanent note, is a thing that I said on the press tour a couple of times, and I'm going to bastardize it and rip it up because I can't remember exactly how I said it. But we're living in a post-truth world now.
Yes.
Where what is true is no longer based upon reality, but instead is based upon who says their lie first, who says their lie loudest, and who gets more people to say their lie. I think, is it Goering, it might be Goebbels, who said, if you repeat a lie enough times, eventually it becomes the truth. That's the world we're living in, where newspapers aren't checking their sources because they need to get a story out before it gets out on social media. And a lie will run around the world twice before the truth has got its boots on. We're living in a time where all of our systems are failing us, where capitalism is eating us alive, where the government agencies that we have relied on forever to keep us safe are the ones attacking us. And since the invention of the internet, before the internet arrived, we believed that politicians were smarter than us, that they were more educated than us, that they were better at politics than us. But since they all got social media accounts, we've learned that they're idiots, majoritively, and that they don't know what they're doing any more than anyone else does. So we're living in, I think, probably the worst period for truth and decency in human history. And then you've got the Federation and Star Trek, which presents us with a world where we're past all of those things, where the truth is not a question up for debate depending on your political or religious beliefs, whereas Picard says to Wesley Crusher, the first duty of every Starfleet officer is to the truth, whether that is scientific truth, historical truth, or personal truth. It is the guiding principle upon which the Federation is founded. And if you can't get behind that what we are today is the antithesis of where we need to be, then you're probably one of the people who is benefiting from it. Which would make you the 0.01%, I would hope. And that's why Star Trek matters, because it shows us the way out, and it shows us the way to be better. And it's up to you, viewer or listener, whether you want to be a part of that or not. And I just hope that more people would choose to be a part of that than would choose to be standing in the way of that. Because you're not just gatekeeping a project from somebody, you're gatekeeping a better life from everybody. And there you go. That's how I feel about it all.
Thank you so much for watching this abbreviated version of this podcast. Now, if you go to our audio platforms, you will get the full version of this podcast with this guest. So we really, really appreciate you subscribing to that, and you're just awesome and wonderful. Thank you so much.